Okay, good afternoon. My name is RT Brown. I'm with the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. And today, this is the second workshop or webinar on for our REGENER8 program. And the focus here is on potential buyers. The first webinar we did on December 10th was focused for sellers of businesses. Today's on buyers, and the next one we are going to do will attempt to connect some potential buyers with potential sellers and hopefully make some meaningful connections for folks. So today I'm just going to go over sort of the order of events, and then we're going to jump into it. So we have with us a guest. His name's Peter Jacobson. He doesn't have video, so it's just going to be his audio. But he has kindly joined us. And Peter, can you let me know, how are you on time? I have some background information that I'm hoping I could share, and then we could switch to a discussion with you. If you've got the time, does that work?
Yeah, I'm blocked off from 1 to 3. So
okay, all right.
As long as you want me to be around and I'm part of the conversation, I'm yours until 3.
Okay, and I'm not I blocked off, and this was scheduled 1 to 3, but this will probably at most go for an hour. So y'all got an hour back. You're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to share a screen here. No, I don't want that. I want that. Okay, I want to start on my pretty start slide. Okay, so I already explained that we're doing this on behalf of the program REGENER8. It's funded by the USDA. The USDA provided us this. We're calling this a pilot, really. But I'm going to just go over the purpose of why we're here. This is the agenda. We've got our guest, Peter, and then when we talk to Peter, I'll jump out of this slide deck and then have the discussion with Peter, and then I'll jump back into this to go over some other things, resources, and so forth. So I just want to give folks an understanding of why we're thinking about this. In our region, in Windham County, and this is the same across the country in rural areas, the population over 60, baby boomers, is high. And you can tell that even in our county, it's slightly higher than the rest of the nation. So a lot of baby boomers, and if you notice I'm looking off to one side, that's because I've got my laptop screen and then my other main screen, and the slide deck is appearing on my main screen. So, there are slightly under 2,000 establishments in Windham County within our region, and if 30% of the population is 60 or over, that means potentially 562 private companies are at risk, or slightly over 5,500 jobs. And for us in the world of economic development, that's a risk. So that's why we tried to, a couple of years ago, actually started to try to think about what could we do to help businesses better prepared to transition, because it can actually it's a 3 to 5 year process, but then take it to the next level and maybe try to put out some programming to help educate buyers, and then, like I said earlier, try to make some connections. Boomer-owned businesses are overall of a higher value than businesses owned by any other age cohort, and that makes a lot of sense, really, because they've been around longer. They're more mature businesses. up to 40% of a city's economy may be made up of boomer-owned businesses. So can you imagine, what if 80% of those end up not making it, or not making successful transitions? That's a pretty significant impact. Speaking of impact, so what's really affected? Really a lot of sectors, most of the bigger sectors, but most importantly, it's activities that import dollars to a region. And let me just touch on why that's important. And Sarah, if I leave anything out, because this has been an active discussion between us and another group, when you circulate dollars within a community, so someone works at a restaurant, they earn their wage, they earn their tips, then they go to the local store and they buy something from that local store that was produced locally. That's what we refer to as circulating dollars from within the region. But for people, for entities, for firms, for businesses to really generate significant or meaningful wealth, for lack of a better word, and get to a point where they can add employees, which can impact someone's life pretty substantially. Dollars from outside the region have to be brought in. So if a good number of these jobs, if a good number of these businesses that are owned by baby boomers, that are importing external dollars, that's a concern to those of us who work in the field of economic development. So we think there's an opportunity here. Particularly because if I do a lot of work with new businesses, and it's a tough road. So in some ways you could look at someone buying a business as kind of like buying your next job. 20% of new businesses fail during the first 2 years, 45 in the first 5 years, 65 in 10 years. So, and the last bullet, I might as well keep going, 25% of new businesses make it to 15 or more. So, it's a tough road to start a business from scratch. So if you've got a business that's what's called a going concern, it's got revenues, it has some trained staff, it's got equipment, and you're able to walk in, pay a fair price and immediately have some income, potentially make some improvements to expand and grow the revenue, that in our eyes can be a lot less risky. So the focus for today is there's a couple of ways a business can transition. It can, a seller could go to a worker owner cooperative. It could be transitioned to an employee ownership model. We touched a lot of this on the previous webinar, so I'm not going to dive into any of these really. Or it can transition to within a family. Our focus today is really on a third-party sale. Okay, and here I am going to stop sharing, and I think, yeah, I'm going to transition now to a discussion with Peter Jacobson. Hold on, I've just got to manipulate my screens. So Peter, we were introduced just by email, probably 2.5 months ago. Peter sent out a proactive message to us here at the BDCC. He, if after this you look him up on LinkedIn, you'll see that he describes himself as an aspiring small business owner or aspiring entrepreneur. And he's got a background in industrial operations and is looking very strategically to take over an existing business. But what's really interesting is Peter has a keen eye on the kind of business he wants to take over. And I won't put words in his mouth, but except for maybe one. And he calls it, the kind of business he's looking for is called a gritty business. And I'll let him explain what he means by that. But, so we connected. It was part of an outreach effort of Peter's to, connect with folks like us who might have our fingers on the pulse of companies that might be looking to transition. And I invited him to chat with us here because he's looking to buy a business, and that's the focus of this webinar. And I thought that having Peter share some of his thoughts about the process, his evaluation criteria would be helpful. So Peter, how are you today?
I'm doing really well, RT. Thanks for that introduction and that generous description of what I'm doing.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. So maybe let's just start by providing some folks with some context, a little bit about your background and how it is that you came to making the decision to be self-employed by the acquisition of a business.
Sure. Yeah. So I have a pretty corporate business background. Out of college, I worked for a consulting firm for a couple of years. Then I started my sort of more industrial journey, but that actually started working in strategy for the cement manufacturer Lafarge, where I was doing a lot of mergers and acquisitions analysis. My next role is really where I started my steel-toed boot, hard hat lifestyle, where I was managing maintenance for a barge fleet. Then I was doing supply chain in the Midwest. Then I went to business school and got my MBA. And then I was running track maintenance and construction for the New York City subway. So again, kind of part of that industrial operations experience. I left the subway and moved to Vermont as a lifestyle move. I took some time off, and my intention was just to, get a job, frankly. My skills maybe weren't very valued in Vermont, and wasn't able to find something that was satisfactory. And that began me thinking about alternatives, which led me to buying a small business. Entrepreneurship is something that's been in my family. My grandfather was a successful entrepreneur, and he was kind of my first business mentor. He started a building control panel manufacturer in New Jersey in the mid 50s, which was pretty high tech stuff back then. He did that for about a decade. As bigger players were starting to displace him, he moved into real estate, and yeah, he did well. And so he was my first mentor, and he was, as a young boy, he was in my ear about the advantages of having your own business. And so as I've lived kind of my corporate life, that's always been in the back of my head. My grandfather's voice talking about the control of owning your own thing, the fact that your work goes directly, to your own bottom line as much as you want it to, and the ability to have independence and to be your own person. So, the fact that, the traditional kind of working path that I'd been on just really didn't feel viable anymore. And it seemed like a great opportunity to explore this path that my grandfather had lived and had sort of subtly encouraged me to pursue as well. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am. And then there's a lot of other reasons that I'm doing this search, but anyway, I think that serves as a decent intro.
Yeah, no, it helps provide some context. So you talked a little bit about this, I believe, but let me just ask directly. I was speaking to it as well. From your perspective, what is the value of going in and purchasing an existing business versus, maybe just, you've got an MBA, I think from a really good school, Dartmouth, I believe. You could probably start a business from scratch. So what is the calculus there for you?
So I think I have a lot of, I try to have humility, and I don't think that business is easy. And I don't think starting a new business is easy. I believe in those statistics. I think people whose businesses are failing it's not because they're not trying, and it's not because they're idiots. I think it's hard.
Yeah.
And I like to consider myself to be someone that's business savvy, but by no means does that mean I believe I could start something from scratch and have it succeed. I mean, I hope it would, but I think it's still really risky. And so, fortunately, I'm in a position where I have, some money in the bank, and that could be leveraged with a bank loan to buy something. And uh, I'd much rather, I know from my career that I'm capable of taking something that exists and making it better. I don't know from my career that I can start something from scratch, so I feel much more comfortable buying a business and improving it versus entering the market and forcing my way in, offering a service that doesn't already exist, or competing with established players. If I buy an HVAC company, I'm basically buying the market share in part. If I start an HVAC company, the only way I can build that business is by eating someone else's lunch, and that's a risky proposition. It means I'm
Hmm.
pushing someone else out, which usually means you're dropping price, or you're just being disruptive. And so anyway, for me, I have some risk tolerance, but I think starting something from scratch is outside of what I'm comfortable with. And frankly, buying an established successful business isn't easy, and it's possible that I might not be able to do that. So it's possible that, who knows, in a year or a year and a half, I might be starting my own business.
Yeah.
But I
Okay.
think it's better. I'd prefer to buy one that exists. That's
Okay.
kind of how I think about it.
You touched on something that I think is really important. In our first webinar in this series, I had invited his name's Bill Daly, William Daly. He owns the Vermont Country Deli, to be, I'll call it the reflective practitioner, the sort of the role that you're playing now, Peter. Um, and he, as part of his evaluation criteria, when he was looking at businesses to purchase, he purchased the Vermont Country Deli about 12 years ago. He was looking for a business that he could take from, and I think these are his words, good to great. So is how like can you talk to a little bit about that? Like how much of that is part of your decision making? Um, is it possible for you to come across a business and say, wow, this is a great business, but then have the honest conversation with yourself and end up saying, I don't know if I can make it any better.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. And kind of the frame that I'm bringing to bear as I look at businesses is the kind of business that I'm going to buy needs to be one that, even if I didn't improve it at all, it would be a good purchase. It would pay for itself. It would pay me a salary, and it would be something that I could, depend on to continue existing. I hope that I'm able to improve it, but I'm not making a purchase. I'm not going to buy something that's losing money or barely breaking even with the hope of making it better. So that being said, for instance, there was a plumbing company that I took a look at in Portland, Maine, and it was a pretty good business. It had been doing about 200,000 a year in operating earnings, which is the abbreviation for that is EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation. But anyway, so it was a profitable business, and but as I looked at it closer, I came to realize it was owned by two plumbers, and maybe had, besides the two plumbers, 6 employees. And so, I figured, I've done field management, I could take this on. But as I learned more about what the owners were doing, basically one owner was kind of an administrative role, the other was, the operations manager in the field, and he was babying his crews in a way that I knew I couldn't do. So every morning he would make sure that the crews had all the right tools in their trucks, and he would go to every job every morning and help them plan out how they were going to do their
Hmm.
work. And it's possible that he was overdoing it and his crews could do this without him, but that gave me a ton of concern because I knew on day one I wouldn't be able to provide them that sort of support and guidance. And so that played into my decision to not pursue that purchase.
Oh, that's fascinating. Do you think that's because, you know, a lot of them were still, I don't know, apprentices or green in their or early in their careers, and he just knew that he had to provide that kind of guidance, or what, or was it a control issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, with small business, and not just small business, just humans, ego comes into play a lot. And so, he had master plumbers and people, of that six, I think, they weren't all green.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so it's hard for me to know whether they actually needed that, or whether, this co-owner needed something to do and needed a way to, exercise his knowledge and his mastery and feel like he was contributing to the business. So I'm not sure, but it made me nervous. That's for
yeah.
sure.
So beyond the numbers, like beyond what's on the balance sheet and the P&Ls, what else do you look for?
So who the owner is really important. It's important in a few different ways. One is that no matter how much work I do to research the business and talk to the customers and, evaluate the financials, uh, no matter what I do, that owner is always going to know more about the business than I will.
Yep.
So trust is really important. If the owner decides that he wants to try to trick me and sell me something that isn't real, there's a chance that he'll be able to pull that off, or she, for that matter. So it's important that I be able to trust the owner. Um, and then another big part is, I've done a few different things, but chances are, whatever business that I buy, it's going to be a business that I don't have much experience in. So for me to be successful, it's important that the owner is willing and able to teach me, to transition the business into my control, and to teach me how to run it effectively. And so if it's somebody that's not willing or able to do that, or if it's somebody that I don't want to spend time with, that's a problem. So there was a business, I'd love to stay in Vermont. I live in Burlington, but I'm looking more broadly. And so
Yep.
I'm looking from Adirondacks to Maine. And so there was a lumber yard outside of Lake Placid, and it was a good business. But to be blunt, the owner was an asshole, and I couldn't see I couldn't see working with this guy,
Yeah.
and I mean, we were far apart on price. And so it's possible that we never would have gotten a deal done. But when I saw how difficult he was and how unpleasant he was, it made me very willing to walk away and not try to, negotiate and get to a place where we could agree on terms. I was like, I can't work with this guy. So yeah, there is more than just what the finances are. A big piece of it is who the owner is.
Yeah, okay. That's great. You know, I think it's been since I think when we last spoke, it was before the holidays. Uh, anything closer to your liking at the moment?
Yeah. There's so mid-December I put in an offer for an HVAC company in Maine, in central
Oh,
Maine.
okay.
And the owner, I like the owners. They're people that I can work with, and they've built a good business that has structure and has support, and that they're not necessary to continue being in, for it to be successful. The holidays have kind of their business has a couple of things that are unique that are not great. So there's high customer concentration. So one customer represents 35% of annual revenue, which is
But
risky
but
and scary.
that's an opportunity too, right? I mean, to better diversify it.
Yeah, it could, but if I buy it and the next year that customer walks, I've lost a lot of money,
Yeah.
basically, and maybe won't be making my bank payments. So it's a scary thing. So anyway, and the owners are also very young, which is a scary thing, because they're staying in the area, and there's a chance that they might re-enter the business. They also have children that are in the trades. So anyway, to protect myself from these risks, I put in earn out clauses, which is basically, if they respect the 5-year non-compete, they get a big payment. And if if that big customer stays effectively, they get payments. And so I don't think they were expecting those clauses. And, they're trying to develop comfort with that.
Yeah.
And so, they're trying to meet with attorneys and whatever. And so anyway, I think soon I'll hear back from them, and then a negotiation will ensue. But anyway, so that's the most concrete thing that's going. And then yeah, there's a couple other people that I'm talking to, but that's the furthest along right now.
Huh, that's interesting. So if they're so why are they looking? Do you know why they're looking to transition?
The owners
Yeah.
of the HVAC company,
Yes. Yeah.
um, what they say, and well, first of all, the husband, so they're in their mid 40s, which is pretty young to have
Yeah.
to be selling a profitable business.
Right.
And so the husband had a heart attack this past summer.
Okay.
Uh, so that's part of their motivation. And the wife is very active in the business, and she's very good at what she does, but she's, doing a bookkeeping and financial control and ARAP role. And, and she doesn't like it. It
Yeah.
doesn't bring her joy. And because they've been successful, they have money, and there's no need for them to be doing jobs that give them a heart attack or that make them want to quit every day. So I mean, that's what they've told me, and that's what I believe. But yeah, I am worried, and that's why there's a big non-compete with a strong payment to incentivize them.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I'm inclined to jump back into the presentation to go over some nuts and bolts, Peter. But if you can hang out and jump in when you either see me make a faux pas or have something to add, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll be here, and I'll look for your prompts to
Okay.
to
Okay, awesome. All right, so let me just go back to my any questions for Peter at the moment? Let me pause and ask.
I'm curious where you've been finding these deals, Peter, and if you've moved sort of past the web resources and found brokers to work with across that geography that you're looking at.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a big part of the search. So some opportunities, the way that I pursued my search was the first 2.5 months, I just networked in my target geographies, which is how I met RT, for instance. So talking to banks, talking to brokers, talking to, the economic development folks, talking to alumni, anyone that seemed like they might have relevance for what I was trying to do. And so, I found a few opportunities through that route. RT introduced me to a business owner in Southeast Vermont, for instance, and that didn't go very far, but sometimes those introductions do yield, opportunities. And then, yeah, I definitely use the big online resources, BizBuySell and Axial. And then also, when that stuff gets slow, because I'd rather spend my time vetting deals with, with owners who know already that they want to sell. But, sometimes there just isn't enough deals that I'm interested in to look at. And so when that happens, then I do, the fancy word would be proprietary outreach. And the more kind of realistic word would just be, email spamming. I mean, it's not spamming, it's directed, but, I'll send unsolicited emails to business owners in industries that I'm interested in.
And Peter, I with your blessing, of course, I'd if Steve's interested, I could share like that initial email that you sent to us as your, what'd you call it? Proprietary outreach?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, but feel free. Yeah, go for it. Share whatever you want.
Steve, I don't know if that would be of interest, but
sure, yeah, definitely. Thanks.
What's cool is, of course it had a resume with it, but it had, a description of in definition of the nitty-gritty, the gritty business that he was trying to identify and source. So, okay. Anybody else have a question? Okay, I'm gonna jump back into the slide deck. All right, so we talked about that, the primary focus of this is third-party sale, which is exactly what the process that Peter just described. It's a sale to a third party. Oh, shoot. Okay, so I just want to go over a few key terms, and you've already heard Peter mention EBITDA, but you know, I don't necessarily know the level of sophistication of attendees, so I've only got one slide, but I could probably have 10 slides on this, but I just wanted to sort of cover a couple of terms that are important when dealing with business transitions. So there's the financial statements, and the big three, of course, are balance sheets, profit and loss statements, also known as income statements, and cash flow statements. So that sort of goes without saying. I didn't even spell those out, but those come into play because when you are talking to a seller, you are going to want to ask for, I don't know, Peter, 5 years of financial statements as well as a year to date.
Yeah, I mean, the more you can get, the better. But the norm is the last 3 years is what I typically see and feel comfortable asking for.
Okay, and then sellers' discretionary earnings. So this is I mean, it's not necessarily complicated, but it's important because it helps you understand what the value of the business is. So the first bullet sort of describes the formula, if you will, to arrive at SDE. But and then the third bullet is a really good little write-up that I found that explains it, and I'm happy to share this presentation with folks. But the SDE, is essentially what you will realize as the owner of the company. EBITDA, which you heard Peter reference, is earnings before taxes, interest, depreciation, and amortization. And that's a way in which you're able to compare the performance of a business to another business. So these are the two, I would say, the two probably most important terms in concepts that you'll want to be familiar with as you start to negotiate and sort of analyze other businesses. Now, if you're hiring an accountant or maybe a business broker, which I'll touch on as a buyer's representative, they might do a lot of that for you, but you should still know, the basics. It's kind of like buying a house in a way. Peter, anything else to add to these two?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Those are the two key metrics, SDE and EBITDA. And yeah, and they're very similar. I mean, the way I think about it is that, the seller's discretionary earnings is EBITDA plus the owner's salary or other benefits that they're taking from the business, like if they're, but that should be reflected in EBITDA. So yeah, so I'd say SDE is EBITDA plus owner's salary.
Yeah. So valuation. So there's three primary types of business valuations for a business: asset-based, and that is just at a high level. I'm not going too deep into these. An asset-based valuation is really, what's in the bank account, what equipment's on hand, and maybe the value of what's called goodwill. And so it's pretty straightforward. An earnings valuation is oftentimes a multiple of either EBITDA or SDE. And those multiples vary from industry to industry. So I have access to a resource that can tell me that information by industry. So if you're at that point, I'm happy to help, but it's readily available if you do a little bit of research. And then a market comparison value is it's sort of like the valuation of a residential property when, the appraiser for the bank goes out and tries to find the comps to support the value of the property, the price that you're going to pay for that particular house. The same approach can be done for a business. So how do you know the value? So Peter talked about this a little bit. You've got to ask. So you're going to be asking for, and you have to start feeling comfortable, asking questions that feel really, really personal, because they are. But you're asking for the financial statements to understand the performance of the business. But then you're going to be asking for personal taxes to validate what those financial statements say. So, it feels strange when you first do this, but as someone who's transitioning their business is completely used to having to provide those kinds of documents. Peter, is there anything else that you would add to that?
Yeah, I would say if you're looking at deals that brokers have prepared, they're going to have the financials ready most of the time. I mean, some brokers are not, right? There's variability in how good these brokers are and how much attention they pay to specific deals. But so that upfront ask you won't typically have to do. But yeah, if you're, if someone comes to you looking to sell their business, or you stumble upon someone that hasn't worked with a broker, then yeah, you have to do that work. And it can be, I've had some really weird experiences with owners where, there was a guy who I had been pursuing the generator sales and service industry for my proprietary outreach. And I had connected with this guy who in Maine, who, expressed an interest in potentially selling his business. And so I went and visited him in person because I was visiting the HVAC company anyway. And, he wanted to sell me his business for $1 million, or a 7-figure sum. And the guy wasn't going to provide me any financials. It was insane. So, there's crazy people in all walks of life, but any seller that's serious will give you this stuff.
So now I'm just curious, like, you were meeting with this person face to face. You said, okay, well, can I see the last 3 years financial statements? And he just said no.
Yeah, he acted like offended, like I called his baby ugly because I didn't believe that his business was worth $1 million. I mean, he was a total, strange person.
Yeah. Okay.
But just because you're a strange person doesn't mean you don't have a profitable business. But whatever. So I had, once he told me that he wasn't going to share it, I knew that this was all just, it wasn't serious anymore, and so it was just kind of like more of a social visit at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, especially in the small business world, small business owners, I mean, it's part of the freedom that I seek, but you're not accountable to these corporate hierarchies and norms. And so there's a lot of people that either go into this world that are kind of weird, or maybe after being in it for a while get weird. But yeah, there's some strange small business owners out there for sure.
Well, so in a lot of, in just the work that I do, the classic definition of financial statements, or the reason why you have financial statements in the form that they exist is so that the users of financial statements can understand the performance of the business. And they're in a standard format for a reason. And one of the reasons is if your business is seeking lending, or if your business is, maybe seeking investors. But if you're running your business and you never have to share financial statements, you don't have any users. So therefore, yeah, to your point, they just might not worry about it. I don't know how they run their business, but
I think with this guy, I assume that he had statements, but it was about his privacy, where he didn't want me to know. I mean, when you look at the financial statements, if you combine that with what is the owner's salary is, exactly how much money that person's making, so that can be uncomfortable. But again, if you want $1 million for your business, like, you better show me, that you're making money, right? And I'm not going to take you at your word. So it's just unrealistic.
So okay, let me try to explain this. So this graph illustrates over time the median selling price going back to 2010 to 2020, and the seller's discretionary earnings multiple. Okay, so this is just to give you a little bit of historical context. So that bottom, the black line, the bottom line are businesses that sold for less than $1 million. So businesses that sold for less than $1 million in 2020 had approximately just under a 2 times multiple of sellers' discretionary earnings. And then as the value, the price of the business increases from 1 to 5 million, that multiple increases a little bit. So it seems, you know, over the last 10 years, it's been fairly consistent. Now, why businesses over $10 million are much more erratic than the lower ones, I don't know. I need to research that a little more. So this is different though, but this is just some rough guidelines. So a business that's under $1 million in sales, which is a lot of businesses in our region, you can expect a 10 to 20% seller's discretionary earnings. So that is, you know, the money that you as an owner have to work with and to live on. I'm providing these just to give you some idea of what sort of industry norms. And then businesses over $1 million in sales actually have less seller discretionary earnings, but because the value, you know, because the sales are higher, you know, that amount, you know, can substantially increase. Does that make sense to people? Okay. So what about a business that's not showing profit? So I see this a lot. You know, they come to us for some financing, and I ask for the things that we've talked about, but there's no profit. You know, they've strategically run their business to not show any profit. Oftentimes it's to reduce tax liabilities, or it's just completely legitimate. It's you know, they're paying themselves, and that payment to themselves is an expense, so it reduces the profit. So is there value to that business? That, you know, it becomes difficult. But when we work with sellers, you know, the advice is it can take 3 to 5 years to prepare a business to sell. And sometimes the work that goes into that preparation is getting it so that your business is showing a better profit, so that it makes it more attractive for sale. For businesses that don't have that runway, you know, oftentimes the sale will be what I mentioned previously, more of an asset-based sale. I mean, the value is in, you know, it's in the stoves and the baking equipment and whatever other inventory there might be, as well as maybe a value placed on Goodwill. And what I mean by Goodwill is, you know, if you have a well-known establishment, let's say on Main Street, you know, it's a going concern, that business, that entity has some goodwill associated with it. So you know, the exercise is to how do you monetize that goodwill? So, you know, there is some value there, but it just, you know, you can't, you know, it wouldn't be reasonable for a business owner to say, well, you know, Goodwill has $1 million worth of value. So, you know, it has to be reasonable. Peter, I keep putting you on the spot, but is there anything you'd want to add to these topics?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think you brought up a great point about businesses not showing profit. And you're right, a lot of small business owners basically are committing tax fraud, where they are running personal expenses through the business so that they're not, you know, showing a profit, or they will actively manage their own salary so they're not showing a profit. So, you know, in a year where the business, you know, really generates, let's say 300,000 in profit, they'll boost their salary by 200,000. And that, yeah, it creates a moral quandary for a buyer. You know, do you want to reward a seller who's been committing tax fraud? Or, you know, if you do, you know, do you believe, that the personal expenses they're claiming are truly personal expenses? So that's a very tricky part of doing small business acquisition, because it's a very common practice. And so for me, I definitely prefer to work with a seller that is running clean books, but that being said, like my grandfather would, if my grandmother wanted a new carpet, like he put it through the business. So it's not an unusual practice. And there's a question of degree, right? How much is acceptable? How much can you be comfortable with?
Yeah.
And I think your point about asset, purchases is the only, I buy based on earnings and earnings multiple, because I'm not trying to buy turnarounds. But, if you're someone that, let's say, already owns the salvage yard or knows the salvage yard business very well, maybe you are willing to buy a business that's losing money because you see the value in the equipment. That's not the kind of buyer I am. And sometimes you see a combination where somebody that's, generating a profit tries to sell the business. Let's say the business is making 100,000 a year, just to be super simple. They'll offer the business saying, okay, we're going to sell the business for 500,000, and then you need to buy my inventory and my equipment for another 200. And to me, that's just crazy. It's, when you're paying a multiple on earnings, you are buying all the stuff that make those earnings happen. But brokers and sellers will often have a different view of that. And I just, I tend to not waste time with those people.
Yeah. You said something that triggered a thought and it's escaped me. So I'm just going to pause for a second. I hope it comes back, but it's more on what I have seen with sellers. I don't want to waste anybody's time. I hope it comes back to me. Okay. So the bottom line, or the golden rule, whatever you want to call it. So when looking at a business has to be able to pay its debt, pay the salaries, including the owner, replace assets as necessary, and provide a return on your investment. I mean, that's really, in a nutshell, what the performance of the business needs to be able to take care of those four things. If it can't, if an owner's not paying themselves, there's a reason why the owner's not paying themselves. Maybe they're just tired, and at the end, and it's just going to take too much work to get the business to the point where they can pay themselves again. But that's what I was going to say. That's a lot of times what comes across my desk. It's that owners are ready to start the next chapter of their lives, and they're just to get the business to a point at which the profits are there and attractive. It's difficult. So they do things like stop paying themselves. Anyway, I'm digressing, I think, but yeah, these four bullets are sort of the golden rule. So I won't spend a ton of time, because you can get this information by my just sending you this, but in our world, you'll hear the term technical assistance provider. So what is a technical assistance provider? Well, sometimes I wear that hat, like a business advisor, if you will. The well-known resource, the other well-known resource is the Vermont Small Business Development Center, VTSBDC. There's also funded by the SBA is the Center for Women and Enterprise. So these are folks that someone like you can go to help get more guidance if you're trying to either start a business or buy a business. They're business-focused resources. Some mission-based lenders, and I'll touch on mission-based lenders a bit more in a few slides, also provide technical assistance. Downtown organizations, so like Brattleboro's Downtown DBA, the Downtown Business Alliance, they've been actively providing technical assistance, especially now as they help businesses navigate COVID funding mitigation resources. And then a big one, which I'll touch on again in a bit, is business brokers, and Peter has touched on them as well. Oh, what's a broker? Okay, so a business broker, it's similar to a real estate model. Typically, a lot of times they represent a seller, but they will work with buyers on sort of a fee basis. The local example here in our region is a business called Country Business. They also have an office in Manchester, Vermont, so on the other side of the county or the state. So, you know, they're folks that you can go to help do the evaluation, and they have a very prescribed method to you know, calculate the SDE, the EBITDA. They're people, typically the people on staff, you know, have finance backgrounds, have merger and acquisition backgrounds. Oftentimes a broker won't work under a revenue threshold. So maybe it's around $750,000 in revenue or $1 million. But they can play a vital role in the process. Peter, I take it you've actively worked with brokers.
Yep, I have.
Okay. So lenders, we've got, I'm going to break these into 3 different categories: traditional, mission-based, and seller. So traditional examples are Brattleboro Savings and Loan, People's, KeyBank, TD, Mascoma. Just you know, that's not a complete list, but those are traditional lenders, and they can be an important resource when you're looking at an acquisition. Lenders, you know, people have different views of banks. The more I work in this field, the more I've come to appreciate that. And listening to people like Bill Daly, who's, as I mentioned earlier, the owner of Vermont Country Deli, you know, he really sees his lender as a partner. He meets with them quarterly. They review where he's at, where his goals are, what he's trying to do, and they really, you know, help him, you know, achieve his goals. So the lenders are an important component. Mission-based lenders. So we're a mission-based lender. We have a small revolving loan program. It's been used a couple times to help people acquire businesses, you know, small businesses. Ours is funded by the USDA. It's targeted for businesses that have 10 or fewer employees, and for people that would have a difficult time obtaining traditional financing. And that can be for any number of reasons. But yeah, I won't go into all the specifics, but we're an example of a mission-based lender. And then there's a couple others here in Vermont. Vermont Community Loan Fund. They focus a lot on agriculture and value-added food-based businesses, but you know, they'll do others as well. Community Capital of Vermont, they offer some great technical assistance resources, but they're another resource. Vermont Economic Development Authority, it's kind of a quasi-governmental agency, but I would put them in the mission-based lender category. They're often involved with larger projects. We've done a number of projects with them. So, and then the municipal revolving loan programs are great, and oftentimes we will stack a funding package. So we'll provide some funding. The town of Brattleboro will provide some funding, and then maybe even a traditional bank will provide some funding. It just depends on the scale and scope of what the project is. Sellers are, you know, especially in the smaller businesses, very, very important. Oftentimes sellers provide financing. There can be some really great advantages. So there's one business I've worked with, and this was a transition where the seller provided seller financing, and there were no payments, no interest, but just one balloon payment in 5 years. Some people that might scare, but for this particular project, it's good because it gives that business the time and a little bit of the cash flow elbow room to stabilize, and then, you know, they can either go to at that point go to a traditional lender to get the funding that they need to pay off the seller, or maybe they've saved enough over the first 5 years to just pay out of cash flow. And again, though, you know, seller financing can be combined with other modes of financing. So, so what's next? You know, how can we help? I mentioned the next event. We're hoping to connect some buyers with sellers. That hasn't completely formulated, so I don't know exactly the form of that yet. But probably in a month and a half or so, that's my goal to do the next event. I'd love to hear from you if there's a resource or something that you would find helpful, that we can help, you know, on your journey as you try to look for a business to purchase. I think at this point, I think this is my contact information, but I think most folks have that. I'm inclined. I'm going to stop I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to stop the recording.